Hi, and welcome to the Eczema Podcast, where you'll learn tips, products, and natural eczema remedies from Abby, registered holistic nutritionist and founder of PrimePhysiqueNutrition.com. Here's your host of the Eczema Podcast, Abby.
Are you tired of suffering from itchy red eczema flare-ups? Do you feel like you need help but you don't know where to start? If you felt alone in this, or you need someone to teach you how to deal with eczema, I am here to help you. In my online program, the Conquer Eczema Academy, you'll be equipped with knowledge to help you discover your root cause, conquer eczema, and give you hope that healing is possible. Myself and 5 other practitioners, including a naturopath, nutritionist, teachers, skin experts, a makeup artist, and even a personal trainer will show you strategies to conquer eczema and find long-lasting results. Visit conquereczemaacademy.com for more information. Hi everyone, welcome to the Eczema Podcast. I am so excited because I have a special guest here today. I have Dr. Fiona McCulloch, and she is actually my naturopath as well, and she's helped me with a lot of hormonal issues that I dealt with before I got pregnant and during my eczema journey. So I'd just like to quickly introduce her. She's a naturopath. She's the owner and founder of White Lotus Integrative Clinic, and she's also the author of a book called 8 Steps to Reversing Your PCOS, which is available in the US and also in Canada. So thanks so much, Fiona, for being here.
Thanks for having me, Abby. It's great to be on your show.
No problem. So why don't we start by, why don't you tell us how you got into becoming interested in things like thyroid and hormones?
Sure, absolutely. So I always found hormones really interesting. I have my own hormonal issues as well. I have PCOS, and so I went through a lot of struggles with that for a long time until it was diagnosed. And so I have been interested in it, just working with my own situation, and then also working with lots of women in my practice over many years. I've always found women's hormones to be super complicated and always like a problem to solve, and those kinds of things always make me really excited.
So that's great. It's amazing that you reversed your own PCOS and that you helped a lot of your hormonal issues as well. And today I have you on the show because I want to talk about the link between thyroid and eczema. And there's actually a link that not many people know about. So why don't you just start by telling us how it's linked together?
So there's a couple ways that it's linked. So the first is that people who have autoimmune thyroiditis, which is the most common cause of low thyroid function, so also known as Hashimoto's, they are more likely actually to have different kinds of dysfunctions of the immune system, including allergic conditions and atopic dermatitis like eczema. So those autoimmune conditions actually just disrupt the immune function and cause the immune system to function abnormally. So, and vice versa, people who have allergies and other kinds of conditions like, hives or atopic dermatitis or eczema, they would be more likely to have an autoimmune condition like thyroiditis, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, or another type of autoimmune condition as well.
And I know that with when people have thyroid issues, it's also possible that one of the symptoms is dry skin. And I know for me, you were actually the person who discovered that I had a subclinical low thyroid. And I didn't even know that until you looked at my blood work. So you actually helped me reverse that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I see a lot of people with that, and definitely dry skin. I always check people's, even if they don't have eczema, but I always check their elbows, their lower legs, because that's usually where you'll see the dry skin of hypothyroidism, but definitely a lot of dryness, and then I know that exacerbates eczema quite a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I definitely agree. So how can people figure out if their eczema is linked to something like a thyroid issue?
So it's actually pretty simple. You can just go in and ask for some blood work. The test I would recommend would be TSH. And this is where you'll see a lot of the people with the subclinical hypothyroidism. So most people, their TSH ranges between 1 and 2.5. If you're above 2.5, especially consistently, that's fairly unusual. And that is a sign that you might have subclinical hypothyroidism, even if the TSH is not above that reference range. So that's one simple way to look. If that still looks normal, but you have other symptoms of hypothyroidism, so if you have fatigue, if you feel cold all the time, along with some of the skin symptoms, then and weight gain is another one. But you might want to look at something called reverse T3 and look at the ratio between free T3 and reverse T3. So in some cases, people will shunt all of their active thyroid hormone into an inactive form called reverse T3, and that causes all the symptoms of hypothyroidism.
That's great to know. Are there any other symptoms that people should look out for if they suspect that they might have a thyroid issue that's causing their eczema?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the most common symptom is fatigue. So you'll see that most patients who have hypothyroidism, they say that they're very tired. You know, even if they get enough sleep, they're tired in the morning, they have to nap a lot, and they're just sluggish. Another thing is swelling and puffiness of your tissues. So that could be your face might be puffy, under your eyes, puffiness right there, and swollen hands and feet. And that's a symptom. People's face actually starts to look a little different when they have hypothyroid, so a little bit puffy. Some of the other symptoms are hair loss. So the hair loss can be diffuse from all over the head. That is pretty common as well. And then feeling cold all the time. So, despite the fact that it's not that cold of a day, you're like loading on a whole bunch of sweaters, especially if you weren't like that before. That's kind of something that points to the thyroid.
And it's also interesting because I just want to point out to my viewers that even though I had a subclinical low thyroid, I actually didn't really have any or many of the symptoms. But then in the blood work, it actually showed that I had subclinical low thyroid. So that was affecting my eczema as well.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think depending on like the treatment for that, if you're not really having symptoms, might be different than for somebody who is wanting to have symptoms, or somebody who's wanting to have a baby would be different. There's a little bit more recommendation for the range to be kept tighter. So there's different situations in which you would treat versus not treat that, and with what you would treat it.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. It's important to get your blood work checked regularly so you can make sure that your practitioner can catch things like this. So, Dr. Fiona, are there any treatments you would suggest when people do have a thyroid that is causing their eczema?
Yeah, so if you find that, you've developed some of the symptoms of hypothyroidism, and then also the eczema seems to have gotten worse, especially because of the dryness, treating that would be very, very important. And first thing you'd want to look for is, do you have the antibodies? And if you have the antibodies, then you need to be looked at more carefully because there's more of a chance it will progress further. So a lot of the time, I do treat thyroid conditions with actual thyroid hormone, especially if they're progressed to a certain point. A lot of the time, the thyroid has actually been destroyed to some degree, and so the patient can actually need a little bit of a replacement hormone in order to get the tissues working again. So that's dependent on their condition being a little more concerning or long-standing. For patients who are not in that kind of situation, some supplements can actually help quite a bit. So including supplements like selenium, that can actually be very stabilizing to the thyroid and improve the conversion of T4 to T3, which is the active thyroid hormone. There are some herbs as well that can be helpful depending on the patient. And it really depends on as well if you have an autoimmune thyroid condition or not. So some of those herbs can be ashwagandha, which can help with conversion of T4 to T3. So looking at some of those as being options, those are important. When it comes to other minerals, zinc is actually very important for the thyroid too. So if you have a higher TSH, you tend to use up zinc to make TSH, and so there can be a deficiency. And I know that zinc has a lot of overlap with the skin too.
Yeah, it does. It helps heal it a lot. So I guess if it's deficient in the thyroid, then it also might explain why people get eczema, because that's one of the causes of it too. So I know it slows down healing of the skin too. So everything's like linked together in the body.
Yeah, the thyroid actually affects so many of the minerals in the body and the rate at which they're used. So it's actually quite profound if you look at somebody who has a thyroid problem versus not at their nutritional status.
Oh, wow. That's very interesting. What about diet?
Yeah, so diet definitely affects, and I'm sure, you've covered a lot of this, like with the leaky gut and how that impacts the skin. So that can also impact autoimmune thyroid conditions in the same sort of way. So those inflammatory kinds of foods actually can exacerbate inflammation, systemic inflammation.
And I know one thing that we did when you were helping me with my thyroid condition was that my blood sugar was really high too. So you got me to remove carbohydrates because my body was pretty sensitive to it. So the carbohydrates, it made my blood sugar higher, but once I removed it, my blood sugar actually lowered and stabilized a lot. So do you find that in most patients, like when they remove carbohydrates, that their blood sugar and their thyroid gets regulated?
Yeah, I think it can quite a bit. It really depends on the person. So if somebody's a little bit more, their A1C is higher, meaning that their actual blood sugar is higher, for them, that can work actually quite well. There's other patients who are just a little bit insulin resistant, and for them, also lowering carbohydrates can be helpful. But in some patients, lowering them too much can be a stressor. So I find it's very individual, and you want to really look at each person's case. So I don't usually recommend like just taking out all the carbohydrates, but really just like reducing the amount within the meal, maybe having them more with the dinner, and then choosing carbohydrates like that are less inflammatory. So things like squash, so all the different kinds of winter squash are great. Carrots have a lot of carbohydrate as well. So choosing some of those root vegetables rather than the grains, which tend to also be more inflammatory. And those also actually tend to be a little bit lower glycemic index and lower on the insulin index. So they tend to help that blood sugar, because basically if your blood sugar is high, a lot of the time you're just adding into the inflammation.
Yeah, that's so true. That's I guess that's also why diet affects the skin so much.
Definitely. Yeah. It has a huge effect on the skin.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have any other treatments that we haven't touched upon, or maybe any last words to my viewers who might be interested in seeing if there's a link with their thyroid and eczema?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think like especially for patients who notice that their eczema is more hormonally mediated, so if it changes with their cycle, if it onset, at puberty, or if they have, any kind of change in their eczema with having a baby or postpartum, then you might definitely want to look at the thyroid, because that's the same times that the thyroid tends to also aggravate. So if you feel, and I think for women anyway, it's just so common. So it's always good to have it checked. And especially if you have the other symptoms, it could actually make a pretty profound effect on your skin.
That's interesting, because I know a lot of people actually flare up before their menstrual cycle.
Yes. Yeah. The reason for that, which is interesting, is there's actually like a drop of both progesterone and estrogen at that time. And progesterone's anti-inflammatory. So it probably is exacerbating, that underlying inflammation.
Interesting. That's good to know. Is there anything people can do to treat it if that happens during that time of the cycle?
It's possible. It will always happen that your progesterone will drop at that time. So it's sort of a natural thing. So you might want to use some other methods just to sort of buffer the skin. Make sure you're trying to avoid those inflammatory foods, even more so at that time, like dairy and gluten and grains that are problematic for you. So I haven't ever looked at any research on using progesterone with eczema, but it would be interesting to see if there was any direct improvement with that. Yeah, but that's basically what I would suggest at that time.
That's great. That's really great. Thank you for all the information you provided today, Dr. Fiona. It was so useful, and I know that you've helped so many people Even all over the internet, your reviews and your ratings as a naturopath are like so high, which I've seen before. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And if people want to find out more about you and your book, is there more information that you can give on that?
Oh, sure. So you can find me at my clinic at whitelotusclinic.ca. I also have a new website that's coming out, drfionand.com, but it's not really finished yet, but hopefully soon it'll be ready. I also have a Facebook page at Dr. Fiona and so feel free to check those out. And my book is on Amazon. It's also in Barnes & Noble in the US and in some chapters in Canada too.
And I'll include a link to your book as well in the show notes and also in the video description. So thanks again, Dr. Fiona. It was a pleasure having you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Abby.
Take
care.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Eczema Podcast, and stay tuned for our next episode. If you like what you just heard, we hope you'll pass it along to your friends and colleagues. Visit primephysiquenutrition.com for more articles and tips. Thanks for listening.